we'll make it work. Um, so yeah, I'm really excited to demo the map. We actually just launched it last month, and we'll be doing a public webinar tomorrow. So you are all getting a sneak preview before it really goes out to the public. So before talking about the map, I want to talk a little bit about why food insecurity is important to think about in South Carolina. South Carolina ranks the 7th worst in the nation for food insecurity risk, or food insecurity overall, with over 14% of our households being affected. So over 320,000 households in total in South Carolina are food insecure. So when you think about our state, we're near worst in the country. And so even when we start to talk about counties and tracts that are doing good in South Carolina, they're a little bit of the best of the bad. So even the best county in South Carolina is likely to have worse food insecurity than the rest of the country. And as we know, and maybe you've experienced in your work with your communities, food insecurity is a rapidly changing issue. It's affected by things like the economy, natural disasters like we just talked about, and even just household level factors. So a person may suffer an injury and all of a sudden their household becomes food insecure. So even just in the last couple months, we've seen how things like Hurricane Helene can just change the landscape of food insecurity in a community and drastically increase the risk of certain households because certain people weren't able to go to work. They also didn't have power to refrigerate their food. So we saw really marginalized communities be most affected by that hurricane. We also saw recently a large employer in Georgetown close, which means that people may be losing their jobs and may not be able to provide for their families. So families that maybe once had good jobs and were food secure are now facing food insecurity because of these changes. And then finally, there's been ongoing conversations about the port workers and the bringing of goods into South Carolina. Well, if there's continues to be strikes and halting in commerce, well, that could affect inflation and increase the price of food. So when we talk about why it's important to have a map and think about food insecurity risk, it's because we know food insecurity is a fluid issue and it changes rapidly. Even if we were to measure food insecurity itself, it would change quickly based on factors like these. So by measuring risk, we can get a better understanding of what communities are likely to be affected when actions or events like these happen. Also, food insecurity data is not available below the county level. There is some data collected through the United States Department of Agriculture's Economic Research Service on the topic, but really it doesn't get as granular as the county and tract level. So in mapping food insecurity risk, we can look at some associated risk factors and get that more granular view of how food insecurity impacts the community. So I want to briefly walk you through the components of the map before telling you how we actually conceived of risk and measured it. So the first thing, it's pretty obvious, is the food insecurity risk map. That is the primary thing that you'll be viewing with it. But alongside it, we also have health outcome data that comes from the CDC. So it's a number of behavioral and physical health outcomes that we can link to food insecurity. We can't say it's a direct result, but we can say, okay, we know that food insecurity is associated with diabetes or is associated with obesity, and we can see with the map how those two things overlap. We also have demographic data. So you talked a little bit about it in the last presentation, but it's things that the social identity elements that might contribute to someone's risk for food insecurity. So that's things like age, income, race, ethnicity, even their eligibility for SNAP, which is a state program to help people become more food secure. So again, you have the ability to overlap food insecurity risk with that demographic data using the map. And then finally, Clemson has been gracious to share their food access resource data as a layer for our map. So you'll actually be able to click in and see where there's food banks and other resources and when they operate and what type of services and populations that they serve. So I think it's really important that when we do eventually get to the map that you know what you're looking at. So like I said, we're not looking at food insecurity itself, but we're looking at food insecurity risk. And to do that, we developed an index which estimates food insecurity risk by taking into account 4 domains or 4 factors. We identified these 4 domains by looking through the research to find factors that were shown to cause food insecurity. So the first thing I want to talk about is economic status. That's a household's ability to afford food resources consistently. That is probably the biggest determinant of food security. It's, does a household have enough income, and is that income regular so that they can buy food? You'll see under each domain, we have two variables that make up that domain. So for example, in this domain, we have housing cost burden and unemployment. Those variables basically give us a sense of how much the housing cost burden, how much budget a family has left after paying for their housing to spend on things like food. And then the unemployment variable, that of course is important because employment ultimately determines whether households can bring in an income. There's a few exceptions to that, such as when people are on Social Security or they get benefits through the government. But for the majority of families, unemployment is a pretty good measure to determine whether they're bringing that income on a regular basis. The second domain we included was mobility. So this is the ability to actually get to food resources themselves. So things like lack of access to a vehicle prevent households from getting to the grocery store. In a lot of rural counties, they might have to travel significant distance to access food resources. So we know that South Carolina is car centric. That means the best way to get around our state is by having a personal vehicle. So while we also include transit and then that lack of access to a personal vehicle.
Sean, can you repeat the last sentence? I think you cut out one more time.
Yep. So the personal vehicle or having your own car is king in South Carolina. So while we do include transit ridership in the index, it's not weighted or is considered as important as having access to a personal vehicle. There are areas of South Carolina, of course, where there are transit systems, but even then, they're not robust or provide as much mobility as having a personal vehicle. The third domain is household structure. So you can really think of this of how many people are working or bringing an income in a household to the number of people who are dependent or don't make an income. In most cases, that is a child. You know, children come with fixed costs. They have to be fed. They have to go to the doctor. Oftentimes they need school supplies. So all of those things are costs to a household. And so the more dependents you have, the more fixed costs you have to the number of earners means that that household is potentially more at risk or less resilient to a loss of a job or just having overall higher costs than households with fewer dependents. So you see that we have that ratio in the single parent households here, especially because kids are particularly vulnerable. And then in this final category, we have role vulnerability. So this speaks to intrinsic individual characteristics that put someone more at risk for being food insecure. So you'll see that we have disability here. Disability has been shown in the research to have a drastically increased risk for food insecurity. That is largely the result of folks with disabilities often having higher medical costs than folks without disabilities. So they spend more on medical care, and they also have more limited economic power in most cases. So they can't go get the same jobs, or they may be on a fixed government income that prevents them from earning more money. The second category we have here is limited English proficiency. So that is basically a proxy measure for immigration and folks that may not speak English well. So again, similar to disability, that may limit the type of jobs that they can get. It may limit the type of benefits they can get from the government, and it may limit their ability to navigate the food system. It may not be as easy for them to look for food resources online if all of the resources are in English. And as a result, compared to other populations, they might be more food insecure. Let me send a quick message to my wife who just walked in. Make sure that we don't have any interruptions. Okay. And so all of those things together, which I'll show you on the next slide, compose the food insecurity risk index. So each of those domains that you see in the different colors on the left are scored out of 25 points. All the counties and the tracts are compared to other South Carolina counties and tracts to develop a score of 25. So one county is 0, one county is 25. So it's a scale like that. Then we add those scores out of 25 to get the overall food insecurity risk index score, and that's out of 100. But you want to think of it like golf. You do not want a high score when it comes to the food insecurity risk index. A low score means an area is less food insecure. And then the other thing I want to draw your attention to is that we actually measured the risk in two different ways, and that's using rates and counts. So we want this tool to be really practical and just looking at where people are most at risk doesn't necessarily best inform policy or practice, because you could have an area that's at really high risk, but there's not that many people actually living there. So what the rate index does is it looks at the percent of people or households that meet those variables that I shared with you earlier. And so a higher rate index score is going to mean that people in that area are more likely to be affected or to be at risk for food insecurity. And so that means, you see some of those dark purple colored counties on the left where the whole county is filled in. We see Allendale, Fairfax in the bottom left, for example. We would say that people there are more likely to experience food insecurity because of all those other variables that I've shown are present at higher rates in the population. We also developed a count index. And so that shows you the areas where the most people are likely to be affected. So what you'll see, and when we look at the map, is urban areas, even though they may be lower risk overall, like let's look up Greenville right here, it's pretty light pink. It's going to have a much bigger circle because there are more people overall in Greenville because it's more urbanized. So while people may be less at risk, there's just more of them to be affected. And so by using that rate and that count index together, you can get a good picture of, okay, where are people most likely to be affected? Where are the areas where there are the most people to be affected? And then how do we plan our initiatives around that? So with that, I want to move to the interactive demo. You're gonna get a very similar GIS walkthrough here in a second. So what you see here are two maps side by side. So this is a comparative tool, meaning we'll always have food insecurity on the left, and you'll have supporting data to compare it with on the right. Similar to what Andrew did, I want to just briefly orient you to the tool before we dive into any communities, just so that you know what you're looking at and how to access it. First thing is on the left, you have this about page and user guide. So that links out to the organizations who helped build the map. It includes a link to our story map, which is a pretty much recaps the presentation I just gave and has the full methodology for how we develop the index. So, and it also provides more guided user experience. There's actually maps within that story map that are probably easier to use than this, but less powerful. But if you're just looking to quickly pull some data or compare a few areas, it has some cool slider functionalities that you can check out. But overall, once you get comfortable, we want you using this tool because it's just a little bit more powerful. So provides all of that here. You can take the time to read through this. I also want to call out that South Carolina SnapEd offers language assistance. So if that would be helpful to you or a community, you can email them by clicking this link here and they'll provide that service. So that user guide, it always sleeps there on the left and you can access it. Like the other map, you're able to zoom in and out. The two maps will track together. So you have those buttons down here, or you can, if you have something like a touchpad, you can use it like an iPad and pinch in or pinch out to zoom. You can also scroll on your mouse. In this top right corner, this is probably the most important thing. You have your menu of different tools. One being the search bar that Andrew talked through. And so that's just going to allow you to search a specific location. Like I could look at my home or my office. He already demoed that, so I'm not going to do that. There is this layer of the different counties, or describes the layer that we're looking at. So here we're looking at the county layer, and what it's really telling you is, okay, what do the different colors represent in this instance? We then have the layers button itself. So this is where you change the layers, not view what's shown. And what I want to call it here that's really important that you focus in on is this eye icon, because you're going to turn data on and off using that. It's a comparative tool. There's a lot of powerful things and layers that you can switch on and on, but if you don't address that eye icon, layers are going to get stuck beneath each other. So you can see in this case, I have the rate and the count index on top of each other, which may be helpful in some cases. But if I really just wanted to look at the count index, I would have to turn off the rate index by using that eye. So the higher up something is in that list, that means that it has priority. So in this case, the rate index has the highest priority. It will be shown on top. The same is true over here on the right. You're going to get the exact same functionality as you are on the left. If I move the map on the right, the map on the left moves, and you have all the same tools. Lastly, before I jump into a committee, is you can expand both of these maps. So as you can see, if I just want to work in the food insecurity map, I can click on that little small arrow icon, and then I can collapse it back to what it was. And I'm not going to do this right now because my internet's a little bit slow, but you can always refresh the maps by just clicking this circle on the right. That's going to zoom you back out to viewing the whole state and put the original layers like I have here back on. So while I'm at the county level, I do want to briefly show you the difference between the rate index and the count index. Here we see where all the counties are filled in one color. That is the rate index being shown. When I click on a particular county, like Allendale, it's going to pull up a tooltip. And I think these tooltips are one of the most important and best features of this tool. It's rich with data. It shows you the index score, so you can see what its score is when you read across all those 4 factors. It gives you a rank for that county compared to the other counties in the state. And then it also allows you to look at those domains that we talked about and see what is really driving food insecurity risk. I don't think it's helpful to just think of food insecurity risk as this big, broad concept. We really want to understand what's underlying it because we can develop these upstream approaches or practices to help reduce the likelihood of food insecurity in the community. So when we're looking at Allendale, we see that there's highest in a lot of these categories, but it's actually the highest overall in terms of economic risk. So that tooltip, again, you're going to be able to click that on the right as well. And in this case, we're looking at the non-white and Hispanic population. You get the rate, the raw count, and then again, you just see that it is comparing it to the food insecurity. While I'm looking at the rate over here, I also want to look at the count index. So take a mental snapshot of this map. Where's dark purple? I'm going to switch it to those dots that I was talking about earlier. So like I said, you're going to see Allendale and Hampton, which were dark purple, actually show up less in this map. Whereas some of the areas that were light pink, like Greenville, show up more. And that is a result of now we are looking at where are the people most likely to be affected. Allendale may be most at risk, but it's just not, as a county, it doesn't have as large a population as Greenville. So while Greenville may have lower overall risk, there's just more people who could be impacted. So again, when I click here, you're going to see that the data pops back up. What's different is you're going to actually see the count of all the variables underlying. So you can see just how many unemployed individuals are in the county, how many households are spending over 30% of their income on housing costs. So the data is a little bit different because we built the index differently, but it's all clear in there in the data tooltip. And so since Greenville's my home, I'm going to briefly zoom in there and walk you through the rest of the map features. We're going to switch back to the rate index. And when you zoom in on an area far enough, so in this case, I'm going to zoom into Greenville, you're going to notice that the map will change from the county view to the tracks. It's going to do that automatically. So I zoomed in far enough and now I can see Greenville and all of the tracks. I'm going to zoom in close to the downtown just because I think it's interesting how there's a comparison between low food insecurity areas with some really dark or high risk areas. And so when we zoom in, the other thing that's going to change as well is the tooltip. So if I click into a tract now, you can see that it actually compares the tract to all the tracts in Greenville County. So a tract is just a smaller geographic area than a county. You can think of it as slightly larger than a neighborhood. And so it compares the tracts in Greenville County and it compares the tracts to all of those in the state. So I can see that this tract right here is 19th worst in the county and 128th worst in the state. That's something that hopefully is very useful when you think about writing a grant, is that you can just pluck an easy number like that and put it into some narrative. You'll also be able to, again, see all of the domain data down here. We already talked through the count index. I do just want to call to your attention that all of the domain variables that we talked about are also available on this left-hand map. So if you really were interested in the economic question, you could go ahead and look at that data alone. If you are really interested in the vulnerability question, we know that Greenville has a fairly large Hispanic population. This map can help you to understand those underlying risk profiles and help to inform whatever narrative or program that you're developing. So again, if you load these in, you'll get to see kind of each variable of that domain represented, the overall index score, and the tracked population. So while I've focused a lot on the left, I just want to quickly walk you through what we have on the right, because the food insecurity risk data is great. I'm really proud of what we've built. But in a way, I feel like we've also built a social determinants of health map for the state of South Carolina. So again, remembering how important, sorry, I'm clicking all over the place, that this I functionality is, I want to just briefly walk you through the layers that we have over here. So we have community resource data from Clemson. Ooh. That you can see all of these different point data for resources that are available in the community. So you click on them. We just have the data that they filled in, but this seems to be a food bank. And it gives the address and the phone number. So some of these will have hours, the types of populations that they work with, and then we link out to a Clemson food access map if you want to use their experience. I just keep right clicking, don't I? And so the next layer that I want to call your attention to is the demographic layer, and that is what we were just looking at. So right now we currently have a race ethnicity layer on. I'm going to turn that off and walk you through just some of the other ones that we have. Each of these has sub kind of categories you can look at. So you could look at income, which includes median income with no children. See if that will load quickly enough. So it's coming. You'll see median income. Again, that's important to consider when we think of food insecurity risk. We also have age. So you can look at different populations, however that might be relevant to either your food insecurity work or any other work you're doing. Really, you can see where those different age bands are and the percentage of the tract they make up or the counting. Race, ethnicity. So while we do have a bucket for total non-white population, that would include all races and ethnicities that are not white alone. That's because SNAP-Ed has a priority around increasing food access for non-white populations. You also can look at different race ethnicity separately. So we have the Black population, we have Hispanic or Latino or white, and you can look at all of those individually. As I mentioned earlier, we have SNAP eligibility. So you can turn that of the population community that's eligible for SNAP benefits. Again, when you click on these tooltips, they're going to give you really granular data on all of these demographic and other factors too. So even if you're not using the food insecurity data, hopefully you find some of this useful in your work. So you could just get a lot of data on, let's say, the non-white or Hispanic population in this instance. Let's see. And then we have a few other just kind of priority areas. So veterans, health insurance, poverty status. The last layer I want to bring your attention to, I just cannot get that, is health outcomes. So this is the CDC data I mentioned earlier. You can see that we have a host of different outcomes to look at, from everything from coronary heart disease to mental health issues, which again have been linked to food insecurity in the research. So we have depression, frequent mental distress. Let's see if we can get that one in, because we know that households who are not getting enough to eat may suffer frequent mental health issues or distress. And so you can look at that variable here and see the ranking for food insecurity down here, but you get the crude rate, the state rank, and the county rank for those health outcomes.